This is a story about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we live out in the world, and the space between those two. It's about how we love, how we lose, and how we recover, or not, through the stories we make up in our heads. I'm Robin Rice, and this is also my story. Chapter 21. The Best Possible Story. When it comes to stories, there is one skill that, with no exaggeration, will make or break our lives. This skill is a choice that shows up every day, in every interaction, and through everything we create. When the choice comes at a particularly important crossroads, it is vital to exercise this skill. But small everyday choices add up too. What is it? When in doubt, and especially when it is impossible to know a given truth, choose the best possible story. You see, stories do not sit alone, perfectly formed, clear to everyone in exactly the same way. They require interpretation, evaluation, and extrapolation. There can be a dozen ways to see any story, even when it seems to be singularly obvious on the surface. In most cases, unless we are in a court of law, and sometimes even then, the only interpretation that really matters is our own. We all know people who moan and groan, exaggerate the already extreme negatives, and pull out their victim card whenever there is someone close enough to listen. Yet even the well-meaning can forget, fall into deep and narrow story holes, and get stuck for who knows how long. No judgment, I've been there myself, helplessly, hopelessly stuck in a story. This is tragic not only because of the contents and what actually happened, but because the storyteller is highlighting and prioritizing the negative. There is no generosity, which means there is no hope for life, and so no possibility for regeneration. But again, there is this other choice that we, each and every one of us, have available to us. We can choose a fabulous story interpretation of our own making, a positive spin. Sometimes it feels outlandish and even ridiculous to do so. Still, we can. Who is there to stop us? No, really, think about that. Who is there to stop us from choosing the best possible story? No one. The gates to our story prisons are not locked. All stories live in our heads and lives, which means they are ours to shape. Even when we are sure upon sure of what is what and how bad it got and how it went downhill from there, we can dig ourselves out of that pit. Stories got us in, stories can get us out. I'm sure you'd like to know how. One way is to intentionally not know what a story means, or why it happened, or what will come of it. When I say intentionally not know, I mean choose to not know, on purpose. Keep the mystery open. Say only, "We'll see." In doing so, we have given our difficult story breathing room, the time to find a way forward into a better way of seeing it. Think of a child left on the stoop of a church just a few days after birth. For that infant, there is no way to know what happened. Did someone leave them out of love and care, or cruelty? Did the person who left them watch to be sure someone came to get them, or sneak away without a thought? Was this leaving the choice of the mother, father, grandparent, or someone else? Was the one who abandoned them mentally ill, physically ill, homeless or hopeless, or just plain mean? Again, there is no way to know. In powerful stories such as these, keeping the story open may prove to be too difficult. So there is this other way. Decide. Decide what happened, even if it cannot be proven, especially if it cannot be proven. So, will it be a loving story stoop, or a tale of abandonment, unlovability, and trauma? Whichever way it goes, once settled within us, that's how it happened as far as our psyches are concerned. The synapses are formed, the story pathways go forward. No, really, that's what happened, we insist. Even if, when pressed, we must admit we don't know because we could not know. Let me be clear. This is not a story choice point when we're a child. At a young age, we can only choose a story that sits with the best available surrounding facts. We can only piece together what we know, what we are told, and also what is most congruent with all of the other stories of our life. If we are deeply loved by those who have cared for us, we are likely to believe a good story about the person who left us on that stoop. Even if we might wonder at times whether we are loved or not, we will lean toward the positive stories. If we are unloved, however, that best possible story will be, at best, inaccessible. At worst, a cruel joke. Imagine a young child having spent their childhood moving from foster house to foster house with a trash bag for a suitcase. For this child, the choice to believe the best of the one who gave birth to them is more than a stretch. It's a canyon-wide fantasy the young one can barely conjure, even on the best of days. But we are no longer children, you and I. There comes a time in our lives when, with enough maturity, introspection, awareness, and a willingness to look, we have the chance to revisit our early story decisions. We can realize and allow ourselves to become fully aware that, in fact, we do not know what happened, that we cannot know and will likely never know. That's its own kind of grief, I understand. But with work and intention and creativity and hope, at this juncture, we can choose to give ourselves the gift of the best possible story. I'll be honest, at first it feels wildly wrong, like a theft or cheating. Even so, we have the right to choose the greatest story we can find personally plausible, and then we can run with it. Run like hell with it, if we dare. And if we cannot do it for ourselves, well, that will take some story healing. The shamans of old knew all about that. Enter the labyrinth. Sue the shaman looked more like a shaman than David Davis did a magician. Not that I knew what either one was supposed to look like. Quiet, deep, and thoughtful, she immediately felt mysterious to me. I liked her energy and felt a kinship I could not explain. I felt cared for by how she spoke, and through the depths that her words seemed to be coming from. Her office was anything but office-like. The room was full of shamanic, Buddhist, and other ancient-looking artifacts. I could not identify the majority of them at that point, but they felt potent. I knew I was in the presence of the real deal. I entered the room without shoes, as instructed, and sat across from her. 2 padded spaces with blankets were set out on the floor with what she called an altar between us. She had asked me to bring things that were important to me, pictures or other items. We started with a few words about my story, but I could tell she wasn't very interested in my version of it. As if half listening, half tuning in to the great beyond, I sensed she knew what she was to do and why. She understood what I would learn myself soon enough, that it was not until a shaman went into the journey space that she would know what to do and how. She would be shown by guides and was there to let the healing story unfold through her. Years later, as I was interviewing her for this writing, she recalled that my multitude of guides had pressed themselves into her awareness for days before my arrival. As you already know, that was not the first time I'd heard something like that. They were quite insistent, she recalled. She said it happened every time I made an appointment, to the point she had to push them off until I arrived. She also told me, not at the time but recently, that she was afraid for me. The energies were potent, she shared, and you were obviously unprepared. Sue never did pull any punches, and to this day I love her for that. She also felt my skepticism was pushing the energies away, even though I desperately wanted a new story. On that first visit, she asked if I had any questions, and I told her what David Davis had said about my father and how I was blocked by him. She nodded, but whether it was to say she understood or that she agreed, I did not know. Anything else? She asked. No. She instructed me to lay next to her. We would need to stay touching at the wrists and ankles. She put on a CD of drumming through earphones and explained that she was going to go into the other worlds. So contemporary, I thought. My task, she insisted, was to stay in the room. I was to be sure not to travel with her. Having no idea how to travel in the first place, I assumed I would have no problem with it. I could count the ceiling tiles for the 15 minutes she was to be gone. It proved harder than I thought, though. Something was tugging at me, urging me upward or inward or somewhere. My own imagination felt like it was on fire. It was not without a concerted effort that I stayed put as told. When the time was up, she sat up and faced me, then blew a series of deep breaths into my belly and then into the top of my head. They felt strangely powerful, as if a strong, energetic wind had been blown through me. She then indicated that I should sit up and face her. She had a half-gone look to her eyes, and her voice was slow to start. There was a lion and a snake, a desert snake, taking me where we needed to go, she said. From there, she took me from story scene to story scene, mostly ones from my childhood and mostly having to do with my father. She saw him with a projector screen on me. I told her my father had been a TV producer and director. She nodded her understanding but said, "It's the right symbol, then, but this projector was beaming onto your psyche." Oh. She continued, "I took it off and returned a soul piece to you that your father had been keeping. Then we flew together to the Himalayas, your true home. Many guides from many places gave me a vision for you. You have a lot to do." What? I asked, having heard this before, yet still not at all sure how to go about anything. That's what I blew into you. It's not time to know consciously yet. First, the healing. You had many other parts of your soul splintered off. I was able to return the most important and a lot of smaller parts, too. You should notice something in about 3 days. Look for signs. Signs? She smiled like I was the newbie that I was and did not elaborate. That afternoon, I walked the fields behind my house, which I had done nearly every day for the previous year. For the first time, I found an apple along the side of the walking trail. No apple trees, nothing man-made anywhere nearby. It looked like it was from the grocery store, so someone must have dropped it. A sign? I picked it up to find that half of one side was eaten and rotting out. I internally heard the words, "Take a bite." No. No way in hell I was taking a bite of a half-eaten, rotting apple laying on the ground. But the instructions would not leave my psyche. I walked with it for a quarter mile, considering. It felt like a dare or an initiation or something. Like, how bad did I want this healing? Finally, I took one bite from the good side and then threw it into the field. Strange request, I thought. On day 1, the day after Sue's work, I didn't feel much of anything, nor day 2. But on day 3, also went out on a walk through the fields. There was a whole apple in the middle of the walking path. As unlikely to appear again as it had been the first time. There were no bites in this one. It was a symbol of wholeness after rotten incompleteness. I knew that. This time, I knew what to do without being told, and I did not hesitate. I didn't even wipe it off with my shirt before taking a bite. Then another, then a third. I tossed what was left into the center of the field as I had the one before and knew that was that. How I knew what to do, how I intuited 3 bites this time, how I decided to toss the rest, I have no idea. I just knew what I was meant to do. In fact, it had become clear that I just knew this kind of work. At that moment, I felt the results of Sue's journey land in me. Hard. Even today, I get chills thinking about it. How can I explain the feeling of wholeness landing? Your life force returning. I can only say that it was as if the very depths of me, my soul, had put on hiking boots. These boots were every bit as real and heavy as the ones on my feet. Heavier, actually. My awakening had done so much for my greater self or spirit or whatever it was that I was to call that second aspect of me. But until now, the richness of my soul had not seemed to be involved. In that instant, in that field, there was more of me than had been there before. I was more me. I wasn't whole, not by a long shot, as I was to learn. But I was far more whole than I'd ever been, even in early childhood. This healing wasn't for the second aspect of me. It was for Robin. And God, Robin needed it. I knew in that moment that I, as Robin, was not lost, not anymore. Confused by details, yes. My life in a swirling tornado, sure. But not lost. Also, clear as if pristine mountain water were running through my veins, I saw the shamanic path for myself. This method of healing, I understood it. I understood this work. I understood what had happened to me. I had done this before, not as the recipient, but as the shaman. Shamanism. Finally, I'd found something on this path to sink my teeth into. On this journey, nothing was by chance, not anymore, and I was ready for it. I returned to Sue again and again, despite having heard that a soul retrieval's effects can take months to fully show up. I felt greedy to book such an important ceremony so frequently, but I was not trying to heal each and everything from my past. I was trying to fill an emptiness that was eons old. My soul was starving for wholeness, recognition, meaning, and purpose. Sue said not to worry about booking so many, and so I didn't. Something in me trusted her in a way I did not fully trust the others I'd met so far. Not that they weren't well-intending and gifted. It was just that the news stories Sue brought were doing me good, real good. Over time, I would become more and more cautious of allowing others into my story field for any reason. But I never once questioned Sue. Journey after journey, she came back with the stories I was dying to hear. She recognized scenes from my current life and got details that I had never talked about. My father's voice, my oldest son's superhero fascinations, my second child's insistence on wearing a hat even to bed. Each time, I became a little more comfortable that there were indeed other worlds beyond the one I lived in day to day, and that my awakening was pointing towards something real. Also, that it was possible to be in connection and communication with those outside our everyday realms. I mean, I had talked to dead people, I had seen dead people and heard them. But did I really believe it? A part of me didn't. Best of all, the consistency was always there. This path could become repeatable and reliable. I needed to know that. More challenging, though, were the stories she was bringing back about who I really was. My identity and story from beyond this world in time and space. As with the others, they landed as overly grandiose to my ears, and I sat with them uncomfortably. I flew with the condor of the Andes Mountains, she told me one bright afternoon, soaring to ancient hills, hearing the sounds and music of long ago. It was visceral, moving through my body. As she told me, I too felt an ancient song move through me, something I had never felt before in my life, yet clearly recognized. But it is not only the Andes, it's also the Himalayas, she relayed. She had been taken there many times on my behalf. I was stitching the places together, and also stitching in a place outside of time and space, the place you're from. I wanted to cry, as if I was feeling the feelings of some long-forgotten home. My skepticism, my insecurities that I was worthy of her words, took a back seat as I felt myself leaning forward into her story. I blended the memories of who you have been together into one continuous picture. I was stitching the ancient past with the future, inside of timeless relation. Even Sue could not say for sure what that meant, and so I had no way to understand, mentally. I could only feel it as water to my parched heart. Yes, that was the difference between Sue and everyone else. This work was meeting me, meeting my soul, reviving me, restoring me. The shaman's job is to retrieve the soul, she explained yet again. Yours has been scattered across space and time. No wonder you have so many guides. You've been so many places. She smiled at me. I felt as if this moment right now was pre-scripted, something I was always meant to do for you, Robin. You are a star being, but completely unaware of it. Star being? Really? Did my story have to go that far? But I felt into it. True. I felt the stars in my body. Expansive, bright, my own. She said that few were as far along as I was. David Davis had said the same, and a lot of the other psychics and healers too. Why could I not just accept it? Why don't I feel it, I asked, or do I? Maybe I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. It feels like what you're feeling now, she said simply. I told her that when I'd inquired of my guides on my own, which I had been doing for a while now, I asked about people telling me these lofty stories of who I was and who I'd been in other times and places. But wasn't spirituality a path of humility? I told her that the guides answered clearly before, we're not so worried about you falling into your ego as we are about you not stepping onto your path. You will be humbled when needed. That sounds right, was all Sue said in response. I trusted her because it was time to trust someone, and she felt worthy of that. She wasn't exactly pointed to as my teacher, and she would never teach me directly, but she was as close to one as I ever got. Sue reminded me that I'd been in training for my great path since I was a child, since Roxanne, Nell, and Joanne's deaths. Cruel training, I thought, but did not say. So what would become of my ordinary life, I begged to know? What would happen to my children? My ability to earn an income when my alimony ran out? What about my love life, my true Henry, which I was still and ever desperately trying to find? Would the path preclude any normality? She shook her head as if she didn't know, which frightened me all the more. The shaman lives on the outside of ordinary life, she said. As for the love life, I think 2 to 3 years at least before you meet someone special, she said. I did not tell her how that crushed me, how I felt it had to be wrong, because I could not bear for it to be right, that the loneliness was already so astounding, how all the others had said my Henry was right around the corner. Instead, I simply cried and felt the loneliness hollow out my chest. It's often a lonely path, she said, seeing the look on my face and the tears. She assured me that my human identity was not expected to make sense of this, but my greater identity, which was alive and well within me, already understood. Leave it to the work to do the work, she insisted. as if I had another choice. Well, I did have one choice, to be angry, which I was, but I didn't want to be. I wanted the anger to be gone. Wasn't that what all this work was for? Sue nodded in understanding, but had no words of wisdom or comfort. At some point, she came to my home. Neither one of us today can recall exactly why, except maybe to clear some energy in my new house and meet my children. She recalls leaving even more worried for me than before. I was living an upper-middle-class life with no signs of anything spiritual anywhere. Other than a few store-bought crystals and a ton of books, there were no real symbols, no mythological nods, no sense of spirit in the rooms, nothing to support me or provide a lifeline to the deeper realms. "I wondered if you would make it," she said in a recent conversation. "I thought, can I stabilize her enough to bring this to fruition? A lot was expected of you. The guides were impatient, but the energy of the place they were from was so high, and you were so set in your human identity. I didn't know. I did know we had to work as fast as possible." Sue agreed, and still agrees, that the target for our work was vague. What do they want from me? I would ask again and again. She would ask on my behalf, but get no more answers than I did. This was as frustrating to me as the God story of my childhood. Angels who appear then leave, trees that come alive with light, time lost in chairs, seeing dead people but never knowing when. Despite the mounting frustration, the regularly unearthed pain, and the profound anger, for the first time in my life, I woke up every day feeling alive. I grew in my understanding of the work Sue was doing, the methods she was using, and I was quickly learning how to use them myself by osmosis. I already knew what I was learning anyway, so it was more of a remembering. That I was sure of. Yet I needed to deal with the most difficult aspect of the path so far, accepting my own identity as a shaman. I knew I just was. But I also felt, well, who was I to help anyone? At one point, I shared with her how, after all those deaths as a young girl, I came to think that I killed people. And now I was going to heal them? She said the most astonishing thing I could have imagined, that shamans often have a lot of death in their early lives. It's a kind of training, another thing that sets you apart from others, she said. Many people will leave you alone because they are afraid of you, of the energy around you, the energy of death. She said that, had I been born into a native tribe in the days of old, anyone would have seen that I was meant to be identified, chosen, and trained as a shaman. It wasn't easy, she agreed, my being born in the Midwest of the United States, but it wasn't without meaning either. Ordinary people everywhere needed this kind of healing. Why wouldn't the shaman arise to heal her own neighborhood people? I took the thought home with me and sat with it. With each passing hour, a choice was emerging. My many deaths could mean I was a silent killer, as I had long feared as a child, or I could have been an unknowing shaman in training. Chills rippled through me at the thought. The thing was, there was going to be no way to know which story was true. Killer or healer. Healer or killer. Both were unprovable at any level of truth I would want to insist upon. So finally, I did what I have already suggested to you. I chose the best possible story. That I was a shaman, a healer, a magician as gifted as David Davis had said I was, and that this was all known from the beginning of my life, maybe before. I was trained in death, not the cause of it. Even though it was impossible, even though it was grandiose, even though a white woman from the Midwest of America had no business calling herself any such thing. Despite everyone saying that you should never, ever call yourself a shaman, it was something like calling yourself a holy person. And even though I was suspicious of my own potentially self-serving choice, and even though it might not have been true, I dared to decide it was true. In that choice, I felt the old childhood weight of death lift off of me. And that was a healing in and of itself, wasn't it? That night, my guides confirmed my path as a contemporary shaman in a dream, but also warned that the role was only for a time. They didn't say why. Enter your labyrinth at BeWhoYouAre.com.